The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. I'm David Pasqualone, and welcome to this week's truly remarkable episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the David Richman story. This week, Dave's going to talk to us about how he grew up with a dad who was more than 40 years older than his mom, and whose mom was on the other side of the spectrum at 18. What that was like growing up, the things that he in turn and his sister in turn experienced and felt because of it, the personal obstacles and restraints that were placed on him, and then how he overcame it, how he went from a fast food restaurant employee being held up at gunpoint twice, losing everything he had, to then starting over from scratch and working from a fast food attendant to a restaurant attendant, to then he got involved in real estate, then mortgages, then financial advising, then managing 300 people, and then more. So enjoy this week's episode. We're going to talk about overcoming fear. We're going to talk about all sorts of things to help you grow. But at the end, we're going to talk about cycles of life, how to deal with trauma, how to adapt and overcome, how to make sure we're pressing forward and being a little bit better each day. So David Richman is a remarkable man. You're going to hear his remarkable story, and I sincerely thank you for being here. Please enjoy this episode, and like our slogan says, don't just listen to this great story from Dave, but do it, repeat it, so you can have a great life. Share it with your friends and family, post it on social media, and whether you're listening through your podcast player or whether you're watching on YouTube, take notes, unless you're driving. Make sure you're applying those notes. And if you have any questions, contact Dave and I. So I'm David Pasqualone. I'm so glad you're here. And now listen to this remarkable episode, the David Richman story. Hey, David, how are you today, brother?
Fantastic, David. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, I've been looking forward to it. And so our listeners know David's already been super patient. Not only have we had great conversations prior to today, but he actually waited a week because I was in the middle of moving. So thank you for your patience, David. And then today, because everything's set up new, it took 30 extra minutes. So David is the example of just a class act, super kind, and you're going to love this episode, ladies and gentlemen. So David, at this time, like our listeners know, we go through the past, the present, and the future. So start off with your story. Where are you from? How did you grow up? Where did you start forming, my friend?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, working backwards, forwards. Where did I start forming was when I was pretty much 18 years old and my car broke down in Vegas is where I started forming. But I grew up in Southern California, in a quiet little nice town in the San Fernando Valley. I had parents who were 40 years difference in age, almost. So when I was born, my mom was 18. Well, no, they were married. They were 18 and 56. So 21 and 60 when I was born. So the dynamic that I was raised in was a mom that was too young to have kids and pretty much didn't want them, and a dad that was too old to have kids and pretty much didn't know what to do with them. So it was pretty much just me and my sister. A little volatile childhood, but nothing terribly out of control. I'd say the biggest takeaway from my childhood was, besides that dynamic of that massive amount of years, was that I had like a dichotomy. I had on one side of me, I was pretty much take care of myself, right? like at 8 years old, hey, what do you want for dinner? Or what are we having for dinner? And my mom was like, whatever the heck you feel like cooking, because, you're on your own, dude. So it was that. But then the other side of it was, without any mentorship or guidance or kind of, like an environment that taught me anything, I pretty much was very, very unaware of the world. And so when I set out at 18, I had one skill set was I knew how to take care of myself. The other skill set was I had no idea what the world was going to put in front of me for me to handle. So it was those two things that kind of helped form me, starting when I was, a teenager.
Now, to go back, we have listeners from all over the world, all different cultures. And from what I understand, in most cultures, that's a huge age gap between your mom and dad. What kind of things did you experience as a child, and how did you learn to just adapt? Because, I remember we had friends who had older dads and they got picked on a lot. Did you experience that, or everybody pretty accepting?
Yeah, no, I definitely experienced that. And I was not equipped to handle it. My sister and I kind of lived in constant fear of, is my mom going to be really angry today for no reason, or is she going to be happy today for no reason? She was really a really volatile person, and you never knew from one day to the next if the same thing you did was going to elicit a positive response or a negative response, or kind of always walking on eggshells. So that was the hidden thing. The more visible thing was, listen, I can't tell you how many times people assumed that I was being toted around by my grandfather, not my dad. Or if I visited in the hospital, they're like, oh, you're going to see your grandfather? No, that's my dad. So it was a situation that was really weird, very self-contained, for me to deal with, because who am I going to talk to about it? Well, other than my sister, right? And yeah, so I was not the most calm, accepting, understanding, kind of grounded kid. I was on the one side, living in fear, and the other side living in embarrassment.
Yeah, and it's funny you said that, like kind of angry. The
Mhm.
two kids that I can think of specifically growing up with an older dad, they were very angry. Like there's just some kind of frustration. So let me ask you a question. When you're a child, like you said, you don't you need somebody to teach you these coping skills. If we have listeners now that are in that situation, they're still young and they're still struggling with it, what tips would you give them looking back that could help them adjust through this?
Well, it's a great question. And the problem with the answer is that when people tell you how to think or how to put things into perspective, it's usually really hard for you to apply to yourself, right? I can look back and go, geez, David, you know what? You should have been a little more patient. You should have been a little bit more understanding that perhaps he was trying to do the best he could do. Maybe he was a little diminished capacity, or maybe he just wasn't a good communicator, or didn't know how to communicate with somebody 40 years his junior. But when you're living it, it's really hard. I think that the most important thing that I can say is just try to be as patient and aware as possible, and just be as in tune with your own emotions, and forgive yourself for not being perfect, and kind of try to forgive the other person for not being perfect along the way. If I could go back and say something to myself when I was, 15, 16 years old, and I never once talked back to either parent. Like I was never, that was not an environment that would have been allowed, but I certainly wasn't open and friendly and accepting. And if I could sit back and say to myself, which would be answering your question of what would I say to others, I would say, just be patient and realize that they're probably trying to do the best they can do. And are you trying the best you can do? Are you really giving yourself the best shot to make the best out of the situation? Or are you walking around with a chip on your shoulder, closed-minded, and expecting things to be perfect, just laid out for you? Or don't you have to take a part in that? And my part in that would have been to try to be harder, or try harder rather, to be patient, to be forgiving, to maybe understand, to ask questions, to maybe push boundaries a little bit, right? Those are the things that I probably would have done.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And then you said to be forgiving to them and understanding, but also to yourself. It's not necessarily a natural situation. So if you're a little frustrated at times, that's natural. You accept it and you overcome, adapt and overcome, right? Well, okay, so you go through your childhood, you go through your teen years, and we got to your 18 in Vegas. Before we pick up
Mhm.
the story there, is there anything else significant that you want to share with our community about the past? Things you learned, things you grew from, or something that changed your life or even influenced you to this day?
Yep. Prior to that time period, I'd say no. I'd say that the thing that influenced me the most was, again, that dichotomy of, really just being on your own. And number two, kind of, not being aware of what's going on. And probably the only other dynamic that really affected who I grew up as a kid, yeah, as an adult, is as a kid, I think because I was so always in fear of what was going to happen with my mom from day to day, and because I was, keenly aware of what was happening with my dad and how old he was and how that affected me. So I was very, aware of that, is that I probably developed really good skills of observation. And I feel like you can't become aware just because you decide to be, right? Some people are aware and some people aren't aware. And I was keenly aware and observant of others at a pretty high level. Also, David, I was pretty much unaware of myself at that time, just because I didn't have anybody giving me the direction or the understanding of how I should fit into the world and how I should interact with the world, and kind of what the logical steps of progression are as you're going through, life. There wasn't religion, there wasn't schooling, there wasn't mentorship, there wasn't any of that. So I'd say that as I was keenly aware of others, I was probably just as unaware of myself.
Okay. So now you're at 18. I mean, who's not confused at 18, right? Growing up, male or female, and trying to find your place in the world. So what brought you to Vegas and what happens from there?
It's kind of a funny story, and I don't know. I tell it to some people, and they're kind of fascinated, and other people are like, "Wow, that's a nice tale you just made up," but it's really not, and it's just funny because I look back on it, David, and it's like another person. But didn't know applying to colleges and all of this kind of stuff. Like I said, I didn't have any direction. I just somehow figured out that I got to apply for colleges, and I had already graduated high school, and so I got accepted to all these colleges. And I said, well, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive around and see, if I can make it at any one of these colleges. I get in my car and it literally breaks down in Vegas. And
Nice.
yeah, I know, right? It's like out of a movie, but it gets kind of worse in that it broke down. I stayed at a hotel that night. I'm complaining to the person, like, I don't know anything here. Where's a shop that could fix my car or whatever? And the guy's like, I'm a mechanic. You can follow me home in the morning and I'll fix your car. So I did. I followed him home, and he and his wife and kids were really sweet while he fixed my car. And I get on the Boulder Highway heading to the Grand Canyon, and my car catches on fire and blows up.
Oh,
Right? No, not so great. So long story short, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have anybody to call. I was just kind of stuck on the side of the road. I ended up staying. I walked over to the Chevron across the street, and I ended up staying with a guy that worked at the Chevron for a couple of days. He invited me in to stay with him and his family. Unfortunately, him and his family included a bunch of bad characters, and within a couple of days, I was robbed at gunpoint of everything that I owned. So I escaped that house by running out of the window, literally, and found myself, kind of homeless with no money and nobody to call and nothing to do, and really starting from scratch. Like I was I was pretty destitute for a bit. And yeah, that was a big awakening for sure. So yeah, robbed. I love to say left at 18 as an innocent little kid. And about 3 or 4 days later, I'd already been robbed at gunpoint of everything that I owned and nobody to call and didn't know where to go. So you just got to figure it out when you got to figure it out, right?
Yeah, man. So what was your next step at that point? Like, how did you were at base, you were at the bottom, so to speak. I mean, we can
Yeah.
always go lower, but you were at a bottom. So how did you build from there? What was the next step in your life?
I called my sister, made sure she knew I was okay because I left kind of under not such great circumstances at home. And I literally walked into a Jack in the Box. I'd worked there, in high school. And I walked into the Jack in the Box and I said to the manager, I'm from LA. My car broke down. I got nowhere to go. I got no money. I got no job. She goes, well, what do you have? And I go, I got the name of my manager that managed me a couple of years ago when I was in high school. Give him a call and see if I'm a good guy. And she did. And he said I was. And so I got a job and just took it from there. And it was one tiny little step forward, maybe every once in a while, a couple of steps backwards. Like I said, I was pretty unaware, so it was easy to take advantage of me. And I didn't really have I didn't have anybody looking out for me or anybody I could call or anybody I could go to for advice. So I made a lot of kind of really stupid decisions early on about where to live, and got robbed again at gunpoint, because I was living in a bad area. And it was just like one bad situation after another. But like I said, from when I was a kid, I was kind of used to relying on myself. So I just figured out how to get from like one day to the next. And after the restaurant, I went to work at a hotel, and after the hotel, I went to work at a real restaurant. And I just kind of started building my life from there.
That's fantastic. And I'm sitting here smiling, not because of your misfortune back then, but because you literally had like a blank slate and you were, failing your way to success. And now we're here today. So thank you for sharing, David. And that's awesome that not that you had to go through that, but that it made you so strong. So you're going through and you get now, like you said, to a real restaurant. For our listeners all over the world, in America, we have fast food type restaurants, like drive through or grab stuff quick, like maybe McDonald's or Burger King, restaurants might be more international. And then I assume, Dave, what you're saying is when you say a real restaurant, a sit down formal dining experience. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. Again, I look back and I, when you're doing something, you don't realize you're doing it. But when you reflect on it in the background, you go, okay, that's what was going on. So because I was so like afraid that the next bad decision was going to put me in front of a gun, or the next, like, if I don't work harder than the next person, I'm going to lose this job that I need to buy food or whatever. I just worked like literally as hard as you could imagine. I was as ethical and hardworking, first person there, last person to leave, never complained, never took a break, always did whatever people expected of me. And those were good things and bad things came from that. But it just, that allowed me to constantly kind of get a better position, a better job. So I worked at a real, like a sit down restaurant, right? And then became a manager right away, and then became what was, called a new store opener. So I was flown around the country opening up new stores. And I just kind of like grew, at each step that I took, I just had to work harder than everybody. It felt like I had to work harder than everybody. And, one opportunity led to another, because I was just like so afraid of the next bad thing that was happening that I just constantly stayed, on the run, as it was from anything bad. Does that make sense?
Total. And I love that a lot of people have a terrible work ethic and they like, oh, I got a job here, so I'm going to perform at this level. But what you're saying is how I feel life should be, do all things as unto the Lord, not unto men. Now you were doing it motivation of survival and fear, but it gave you a killer work ethic. So whether you were at a fast food restaurant, cleaning toilets, whether you were training people at new restaurant chains, you were always giving 100%. And because of that, you went and grew, and you just kept growing and rising in the corporate ladder, so to speak. So that's incredible. Now, when that was going on, you're now training for a chain, you're flying all over the place, opening new restaurants, which is hard work. That's like 80 hours plus, right?
Oh, for sure. Easy.
Yeah.
Back then, easy. And I was sometimes working 2 jobs at the same time. So I was putting in at times 100, 110 hours a week.
Yeah. So maybe sleeping 6 hours a night if you're lucky.
Yeah.
The restaurant industry is tough. So, okay. So now where do you go from there? You're killing it and kind of killing yourself, but where do you go from that next step?
So I kind of moved from one management position in the service industry to another management position in the service industry. And then somebody saw that, hey, you know what? You're a bright kid. I was still a kid at that point, right? You're a bright kid. You're a hard worker. Maybe you should, quote unquote, go into business. So business for me was a very short stint in real estate, which led to something that was really natural to me, which was doing loans. So I did real estate loans. I was very good at math and very, big hustler, good at talking to people. And so I did real estate loans for a number of years, and then that 5 or 7 years. And then that led to me becoming a financial advisor, which for a major Wall Street firm, which then led me to become a manager for that same firm. And I kind of had that same like work ethic, that same like, oh, I can't go backwards. I got to keep working hard. And because of all of that background, I had to work, I thought, harder than everybody else, which gave me more opportunity. And eventually I'm running a $120 million in revenue business for a major Wall Street firm. So I kind of went from zero to that over about a 15-year period. And, with no formal education, past high school. And, so that was kind of the progression.
Yeah. So when you were going on that college trip, you didn't go to like UNLV or any school. You were just in the school of hard knocks in real life.
Yeah. I mean, there's a positive and the negatives to that. I certainly regret the fact that I wasn't able to get a formal education, and it certainly helped me to direct my kids to go down that direction, because I felt like it would give them, a better base than, you want better for your kids than you had for yourself. And I certainly wouldn't want them to have the hard knocks, but also, I wanted them to not have that chip on their shoulder at every step. Like, I got to do better than everybody else. I got to be, I got to work hard. I got to hustle. I got to do this for the wrong reasons. Like I did it out of fear and out of like this imposter syndrome and this like, somebody's going to find out that I don't belong in this room. Somebody's going to find out that I'm running this $100 million plus business. They're going to find out I'm the only guy in the room without an education, and there you go. They're going to, shine the light on me, and I'm done. Everybody knew, but that's just the way I thought. And so, there was good and bad to not having a formal education. We could, and I'm sure all of your listeners, you could talk endlessly just about those dynamics. Like, is it better to have, lessons taught to you, or better to learn them? I'll take both sides of that coin.
Yeah. And I think I always view some people watching this podcast, some people are listening, but I always picture like a gauge, almost like a fuel gauge, but it's not empty, middle and full. It's like the middle's balanced. And if you go too little or too much in either direction, it's crazy. You know what I mean? You have to find that balance. That's our gear. That's our goal, and sometimes we're a little off on each side. Sometimes we're a lot off. But what you're saying is, if you had the best education in the world, but no practical experience, it's useless. And if you have all the street sense and practical experience, but you don't have that kind of wisdom and insight, the big picture, how the global market works, it's going to limit you. So finding that balance is interesting. And it's great that you help teach your kids like, hey, yeah, I was able to succeed the hard way, but why don't you try a little bit more, the educational way? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Oh, it's absolutely. And, I didn't know it at the time, but I think that it was really a blessing having kind of such a childhood where I was in fear, with one parent and embarrassed by the other and with no direction. And the good side of that experience, again, not knowing it at the time, was that it really gave me some perspective on what I thought was important in raising my kids. And I think that number one most important thing I wanted to do was to give them the one thing I never had, which was safety. Right. The second most important thing I wanted to do was give them the one thing I never had, which was some guidance and some, not talking at them about advice, but talking with them and teaching them, from a guiding, mentoring, caring point of view, trying to give them some insight as to why they should have certain decision making processes and why they should, kind of think about things in a different way, because I never had that. So I think one of the great things is that if you're lucky enough to come through bad situations, the better is that you can use those and apply those. And I kind of always go back to this thing of, especially when it comes to parents, when it comes to business, those type of things, is that we can either mirror what happened to us, or we can reflect and be the opposite. And for me, I think the bad times that I've had have been really helpful to me, because I've just chosen, who knows how or why, but I've just chosen to use the bad experiences not as a way to, mirror what I do, but as a way to look at back in reflection and go, no, I'm going to do the opposite. And so that's really helped in a lot of ways. It's helped me, and it's help my relationships. It helped me be a better leader. It helped me in my interpersonal relationships most of the time.
Let me ask you a question, because we have parents listening and we have teens listening and everybody in between, all on the
Mhm.
spectrum, right?
Mhm.
I've observed that a lot of times when there's men and women who don't have that safety and that guidance and that love in the home, they flood their kids with it. And they're like, man, I want to give them all of the stuff I didn't have. And then a lot of times raising the kids, they're almost like, dad, enough, or, mom, enough. Like, it's like they don't want what you starve for. They get so much of, they kind of reject it. Did you experience that raising your teens, or did you find that balance?
I think I had the balance, and part of that, David, was because I had made a horrible choice in their mother. To make a super long story short, I basically married my mother, right? I married somebody who was exactly like my mom, completely volatile, couldn't figure out from day to day what was going on, not a good person. And when I finally kind of put two and two together and figured out, wait a second, I married somebody who was just like my mom so that I could try to fix it and make it all better, then I realized, holy cow, you're in a bad situation. So I had like the extra motivation to make sure that I did the opposite of what she was going to do. I got me and my kids out of a bad and potentially very dangerous situation when they were very young, just 4 years old. And I think that giving them a safe place to be themselves and giving them some grounded, really thoughtful perspective, love, and attention was something that I had craved for, and something I felt honored to be able to give my kids. And we are very, very close. They're 23 years old. We're very close. We talk, all the time. We have a great, open, wonderful relationship. And, I think it's only because I'm safe to be myself around them and they're safe to be themselves around me. And that's the number one most important dynamic, is neither one of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, sometimes continually, but we're safe to figure it all out. And we're safe to make a mistake, and we're safe to take risks, and we're safe to fail. And it's just okay to be us, and we love each other, and we, there's no judgment, there's no fear installed. And so it's just the way I've chosen to do it, because I never had that.
Now, to the parents listening who want to be close with their kids, especially in the teenage years where they tend to push and find themselves, but sometimes push away, what tips and what advice would you give the parents listening that you saw work to keep that close relationship with your children?
I would say two things that are, I think, the most important is one, predictability. I think that if you as a child don't know if something is going to make your parent happy or angry, or you have no reason why they have some kind of reaction when they didn't have that same reaction in the same type of circumstances, that's just that creates so much turmoil for a kid. And it's like, how like when you see somebody at a pool, David, and they got kids running around and they say to the kid, stop running. And the kid keeps running, stop running, stop running, stop running. And then all of a sudden they grab the kid by the arm and go, did you not hear me? Stop running. Well, why didn't you say that the first time? Why'd you wait till the 8th time you said it? Like, they don't know. Kids don't know how to process that. So I was really, really clear about yes means yes, always. No means no, always. I'm always going to be giving you the best opportunity to know how I'm going to react so that you know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable both ways, right? So just this predictability of your reaction to your kids. If you have a rough day, don't come home and take it out on your kids. If you have a great day, don't like shower your kids with this like fake like happiness. Just be real and let them understand how to predict what you're going to do, because they're looking up to you at every moment. That's one. And then, and I'm not trying to be preachy. I'm just saying what worked for me. And number two is that I think kids are going through turmoil a lot more often than we know of. And I don't know if they always know when it's safe to talk to you. And so I kind of had this exercise where at dinner, we always had dinner every single night. We had a dinner with no TV, no phones, no tablets, no computers, no anything. And we sat down and we just talked. And I asked them, I said, you don't have to answer, but if you want to answer, I want to know the best day, the best thing that happened to you today, the worst thing that happened to you today, and any questions you want to ask me, right? This is a safe place. So just tell me what was the best thing, what was the worst thing, and any question you want to ask, you're good to ask it. Because I could never ask a question. Are you kidding me? There's no way I could ask my parent a question. No way.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. So now you went on this high speed 18 to 33, that's 16 years or 15 years. Did you have your children during that time as well, or was it after that?
No, it was right at that point, right at about 33, 34 years old.
Okay, so you kind of laid your professional financial base,
Mm-hmm.
and then around that 33 years old, that's when you met your ex-wife now.
Yep.
And you had two twins?
Twins. Yeah. Boy and a girl.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It was awesome.
Okay.
And then, yeah. So then when they were 4, just before they were 5, so I was about 38 or 39. That's when, I was in, like I said, it was a pretty dangerous situation for us with her. And so I had to get them out of there. So the 3 of us got out. And that's really, really when my life changed, because one of the things that we haven't talked about, and that is probably the most impactful realization of my life beyond those other ones that I think are important, is that because of everything I've told you already, I was really, really good at trying to make other people happy. I was really good at trying to be the better employee so I could get a good job, or work harder than everybody else so that they would look at me a certain way so that I wouldn't have bad things or whatever. And so every relationship that I entered, work, business, whatever, all I was worried about was the way other people reacted to me, or how they would view me, or what I thought they expected of me. And the last thing that I was aware of, the last thing I ever did was go, okay, what's going to make you happy? Right? What do you need to do for you? What's the best thing for you? And I never did any of that until literally a couple of days after getting me and my kids to safety. I just looked in the mirror and started asking myself that question, like, dude, who are you and what are you doing? Like, why aren't you at all aware of yourself? Like, what, who are you and what do you want out of life? And I never had even contemplated the question, let alone, even took a step towards answering it. And so that was really probably the pivotal time in my life, was that couple of days after getting us out, and just sitting there and realizing, man, you got to start thinking about yourself first.
Yeah, and explain that. There's so many people. I myself for years made the sacrifices, right? Thought I was doing the right thing. And there's so many people who are like, oh, if you put yourself first, you're wrong. Explain to people the balance and the importance of putting yourself first, because a lot of people hear that and shut down. They're actually ignorant. If you're listening to this and you think putting yourself first is wrong, I mean, obviously you have God, but what David's saying, he's going to explain. You are next in the line, or you're in big trouble, and so is the rest of your family. Dave, go ahead and explain why.
Well, thanks, David. And look, I don't want to try to sound preachy, right? I'm just trying to relay my experience, and I love when other people relay their experiences to me, right? That's how we learn. And when I got that, when that light flicked on, what it did was it changed everything. From, instead of feeling compelled to do something, instead of feeling like I had to do something, I started saying, just choose the things that you want to do and you get to do them. So I'm not saying put myself first, like don't think about anybody else. But honestly, my brain just changed, and I said, oh, I get to go to work. I get to work harder. I get to be responsible for all of this stuff. If I've got to make tough decisions at work, I get to. That's like a good thing, right? I get to cook my kids dinner. If I got to wait in line to do something that's for somebody else, I get to do that, right? And so I think that doing the things that you want, and I don't mean being selfish, I'm just saying do the things that bring you joy, that bring you happiness, that bring you peace, that bring you a sense of purpose. Those things first, because they're real and they'll allow you to be present in the moment. And honestly, there isn't anything more rewarding than doing things for other people. But when you're doing them because you think it's what they want you to do, that's nowhere near as rewarding as because you're doing it for them because that's what you want to do. That's a real subtle thing, but it's a major thing, because I ended up realizing I had no idea who I was, what I wanted out of life, what I was all about, because I never took the perspective of the guy in the mirror. Like, I never said, what is important to you? And when I put the things that were important to me first, which was a lot of giving to other people, then it was just like, oh my God, I'm finally grounded. I'm finally aware. I'm finally living a meaningful life. Right. And that was a real turning point for me.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you take care of yourself, it feels totally different than the daily grind. So now you have that energy to take care of others. It's not wearing you out. It's like now you have the heart and the ability and the resources and the energy. I mean, that's how I feel. Is that how you feel?
Oh, no doubt. And I'll give you the real life answer to that. For me, was at that point, I was overweight. I was a smoker. I thrived on stress, right? I like, the more stress I had, the better it was, because that was turmoil I had to figure out a way to get out of. And I was used to relying on myself to get out of turmoil, right? It was okay if I made a bad decision or bad things happen, because I could fix it, right? And it was just all this stress and turmoil and hard work and smoking and overeating, and just I was unathletic. I was just like completely like unaware of myself and taking care of myself and being healthy and having energy and having, striving for things from a positive standpoint, rather than oh my God, I can't let the bad stuff catch up to me. And so when I literally, David, I'm not saying it figuratively, I literally stood in front of that mirror at that particular time, also enhanced by hearing some bad news about my sister, that I literally said, who do you want to be? And the first thing I said is, I want to be healthy. I want to be around for my kids. I want to live longer. I don't want to be unhealthy. And I got to stop eating so much. I got to stop smoking. I got to reduce the stress. I got to start living for the things that make me happy. I got to make myself proud instead of other people proud. And I just dropped it. And I dropped all of the negative stuff that I could possibly drop. And I went for a run. And that was literally the start of changing my life. Like, I went for a run.
Awesome. That literally, you took the first step.
It's
Literally.
actually literally, I took the first step. I tried to run 2 minutes at a very, very slow jog, and I couldn't do it. I
And
lasted about a minute and a half. I lasted about 90 seconds at what would been a fast walk at this point, but just a super slow jog. And I couldn't last 2 minutes. And I went, wow, you're 38, 39 years old. I think I was 39 years old. And you can't even run for 2 minutes at a slow pace. What the hell have you done to yourself? And I just hadn't become aware of it until I was aware of it at that moment. And then I said, no, you got to change this. And then, I just started doing more and more and more and seeing what I was capable of, because if I started doing something for myself and I could accomplish as much as when I was trying to do things for other people's approval, then wow, what could I get out of this life? And that was the start of kind of that journey.
yeah, and before we go on, just to wrap up these topics from this point with a bow, so to speak, and then you can add in anything else. Number
Mhm.
one, you love God, you love other people. That's our role. But in order to be well and to serve other people, you need to be well. So exactly what David says is we need to take care of ourselves, and it's not selfishness, it's smart. And then what the other thing is, I love that you're honest about, I felt like crap after a minute, but you kept running. Maybe the first day is a minute, maybe the next day is 30 seconds, maybe the next day is a minute and a half, then 2 minutes, then 3 minutes. Don't get discouraged, because if you show up at the gym and do 5 minutes, or you do don't do 5 hours, but 5 minutes or an hour, you're better than you were when you walked in. So if you're listening to this like Dave did, just do it. Just take that first step. Just make action and do a little bit each day. Just, how can you be better today? How can I be better today? And just keep going. And is that how you felt? Is that how you thought? How did you keep the motivation going?
Yeah, that's so funny, Dave, because I'll tell you the mantra that's driven me along the last 20 years of doing endurance events and kind of pushing myself in ways way outside of endurance athletics. And I've done, insane amounts of endurance athletics since then.
And
But
just
what
so you know,
pushes
if you
me,
want, hold on, before you say this, we're jumping because you and I have talked and I know where you're at
yeah,
today. But at this point, the listener is like, he's 38, 39 years old, can barely run a minute. And now you're talking about endurance. You want to fill us in with the story of how you got there. So do the mantra and then get us to where you're at today, please.
okay. So while the mantra happened right at the beginning of this kind of awakening of, I got to take care of myself, right? I got to put myself first. And again, I'm not saying in a selfish way. I'm not saying turning away from, the things that are important to you, the people that are important to you, your responsibilities, not those type of things, but just saying, coming from a place of, this is what I'm choosing to do for me. Because, right, look, David, we don't get any minute back ever again, right? So every minute that you choose to do something, I learned is a minute to choose not to do 100 other things. Right. So if you're going to choose to do something in that minute, which you're never going to get back, make sure that's the thing that is most important. Right. And if that's doing charitable work, if that's raising money for others, if that's caring for others, great. Those are blessings that we all hope that we get to do. Right. So I'm not saying be selfish, but when I started saying I got to do for myself, I had a hunger, because I had never tasted food off of that plate before. And so when I said, oh my gosh, what are you capable of if you care about what you're doing rather than caring about what other people think about what you're doing? What could you do? So I started doing this thing, right? So I ran like 2 minutes, couldn't do it. Then I ran a mile. Then I ran 3 miles. And a couple of weeks later, I ran 5 miles. And I'm just like, oh, this is pretty cool. So the next thing I did, David, was the most ridiculous thing ever. I entered a 87-mile rollerblade race. Imagine that.
That's huge.
This is a guy who literally, I'm so uncoordinated, it's not funny, but I'm on rollerblades doing an 87-mile race from Athens, Georgia to Atlanta, Georgia, which is not that far from where you're at right now. And it's called the A to A. It had been around for decades. And I said, I'm going to do something stupid. I'm going to do this race. And where my mantra came from was during this race. I had no business being there. I was the least athletic guy there by far, the least coordinated by far. I had no business being there. Okay. And about 30 miles in to this 87-mile race, I was as depleted as anybody could ever be who's in that position. Like literally 100 yards in front of the sag wagon. The sag wagon is some like van that comes and picks up stragglers that can't make it so they can get them to the finish line in the van because they can't go under their own power. Right. And I want to avoid the sag wagon, but I'm as depleted as I can be. And I'm leaning over. It's hot out. I'm sweating like crazy. I'm completely done. And this line from my sweat is on the road beneath me, right, David? And I'm leaned over my knees and I'm breathing like hell. And I'm seeing this sag wagon behind me and this mountain ahead of me. And I see this line. And I just said to myself, I go, dude, you got two choices, right? You could turn around and go meet the sag wagon and have it take you across. And then there you go. That line, that sweat line that you see right there, that's as far as you'll ever go. You'll know everything about yourself. Like that's it. You found your limit. Or you could take one step further. Just go one step beyond that line and you learn something new about yourself. And another step and another step and another step. And then I was like, wow, what can I find out about myself? And every step I kept thinking, every time I moved either leg was something new. I found something new out about myself. I had a limit that I had no idea I could achieve. And I did make it to the finish, right? Ahead of the sag wagon, and, 50 odd miles later and probably another 6 hours later, but I figured out a way to do it. And I just went, oh my God, if you can do that, what the heck is next? And I said, oh, well, maybe I could do this and maybe I could do that. And maybe I could do that. And I just said, man, as long as I am looking forward, going, I got a higher limit. I got another way to push myself because I'm doing it for me, which is all the better, right? How far can I push myself? It's like every time I push myself to a new level, I learn something new about myself. That is very, it's like a drug. It's awesome, right? To find out what you're capable of. And again, not just things I do for myself, but things I do for other people as well. Something new, something that pushes you beyond your limits. And instead of saying that's the most I can do, or that's the most I can give, just do a little bit more, give a little bit more. You learn something new about yourself. And that is that's a very addictive thing, especially if it's a positive thing.
Yeah. And that's so amazing that you had those thoughts at that moment, because that literally can change your life. I mean, I've seen men come to that crossroad and choose poorly, and then they referred back in the future to that failure moment instead of that moment of success. So while you were thinking, man, if I could do that, what else can I do? We can also get stuck where it's like, oh, I failed, then I'm going to fail again. And that's just a lie from the devil. So you're inspirational, man. And it's so powerful. And you actually remind me of my wrestling coach from high school. He would say to us, he's like, it's proof. And I don't know if this, don't go kill. I don't want anybody getting sick. I don't want anybody killing themselves. But he would always tell us on the wrestling team, he's like, it's scientifically proven that when you think you can't give anymore, you got 10 times that. It's like, I just want 5. And we had a great team. But like, that's what you're saying, man. You're like, I thought I was going to die at 30 miles. You were at 300, 80's nothing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny you said that. Let me give you a real life story. Okay. I worked for a major Wall Street firm. We hired a bunch of financial advisors every year, and every year the same percentage of financial advisors failed and the same percentage succeeded, no matter how we changed the little programs. Give more time, give less time, give more intense training, less intense training, you name it. It's the same percentage, right? Nobody could come in and do anything different. Some dude came in and he said, you know what we'll do? I got an idea. Why don't we just double the goals? Right? Let's just set the bar higher and see what happens. And guess what? The same percentage of people passed and failed, but the ones that passed at a much higher level.
Yep.
Right. So I really believe, David, that we are wired to set lower goals because we don't want to fail. Well, I got an idea. Why don't we set our goals much, much, much higher? Because you're likely not to fail as long as if you rely on yourself, like you are giving everything that you can, instead of saying, I'm going to lose 5 pounds this month, right? Because you're on a diet and you got to get healthier. Why don't you just say something like, I'm going to get to a certain weight and I'm going to stay there for the rest of my life, right? That's a goal, right? That's a real goal. And if you set a goal that's super crazy high, you might just get it, right? You might just get it.
And if you fall short, you're still in an amazing place.
Right. And so I just constantly set these, I was an overweight, stressed out smoker. Okay. 4 years later, I was in a position where I felt that what would make me athletic is if I could wake up one day with no specific training and with no plan the night before to say, I could wake up tomorrow and whatever day tomorrow is and go run 50 miles. That would make it so that I've achieved a pretty high freaking goal. And yep, I did it. I woke up and I said, today's the day I'm going to go run 50 miles. And I ran 50 miles, 50 miles straight.
Fantastic.
And it's like, that's coming from a dude who never did anything athletic as an adult, was a smoker, was sedentary, was stressed out, would never take freaking 10 or 12 hours for themselves, right? To accomplish some personal goal. No way would I ever have done that. And I just said, yeah, you know what? I want to be the kind of guy that could wake up one day on no training and go run 50 miles. I mean, that permeated into so many more things than just the numbers of running 50 miles. It was like taking time for myself, doing something healthy, hitting a goal that was absolutely I couldn't have even verbalized a goal like that a few years before. Having self-reliance. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on about all the things that allowed me to experience, but it was this whole, like, just set a goal that's ridiculously high because you might just get it.
Yeah. And that's incredible for American listeners. What David did is basically run almost 2 marathons. And, if you go by kilometers, I mean, that's 150, roughly 170 kilometers, right? I mean, that's just incredible. So, all right, man. So you're running and you're got to this level of fitness, walk on fitness, you're just training every day. So you're in peak shape. What are you learning? Where are you going? What's your professional life, your family life? What's going on now and there?
So I mentioned to you a while ago that during the time when I kind of stood up in the mirror and said, hey, who do you want to be? Part of the inspiration for that was that at that same time, my sister had told me that she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And it hit me particularly hard because I felt like I wasn't successful in my personal life. I mean, I was in a failed marriage. I had 2 kids. They were wonderful kids. So I was successful in that way. But really, I felt like in my personal life, I was always struggling to kind of get to where I needed to be rather than I was at where I wanted to be. I didn't even know where I wanted to be, but I think I kind of made that point clear. But my sister, on the other hand, she's had, wonderful marriage. She has 2 young kids. She has great friends, she's great family. She's got great career. She's just living her best life. And from where we came from as kids, I really respected that. And I admired that. And I was so happy for her about that. And then when she told me that she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, my first thought was, oh my gosh, I mean, look how far you've come. And now this is all going to be taken away. And that made me, gave me another point of reflection for, here we are, you're just embarking, you just literally became aware that you should be caring about yourself. Your sister, on the other hand, at this point has gotten her to a place where she's done that and unbelievably successfully. and your paths from here forward are going to be very different. And it really motivated me in a different way. And so I really tried to become, a better parent, a better employee, a better leader, a better manager, more fit, more just taking control of who I wanted to be in life, because it just was another piece of evidence that said, hey, you got to start living for yourself. You got to make yourself happy. You got to do whatever. And so her and I had a ton of conversations. We, business was what it was. My personal life, was what it was. It was all of it was getting better, or at least becoming more focused and grounded properly, which probably gave me the ability to relate to my sister as she was going through end of life issues at a better way.
And just so
And
I know, were you guys physically, geographically close, or were you distant at this point? Like, was she in another city?
we were close geographically, only a few miles away from each other, but we were also not always close in proximity, because part of me didn't want to impose on her life. She's living this great life. Her and I had good conversations. We had a good relationship, but sometimes we go a while without seeing each other, talking to each other, just because people live their own lives. And my life was filled with a lot of stress and turmoil. Hers was filled with a lot of comfort and happiness and fulfillment. And I didn't want to kind of take away from that a little bit, or I didn't want to impose on her my stresses and my negativity and the things that were going bad in my life. Right. And so there were times when we were close and weren't close. We all, when I moved back to California from Vegas, and, was living here and was building my life here again, we only lived, maybe an hour away from each other. So we were close, but when that happened, we became a lot closer. We saw each other a lot more. We kind of changed I was on a more positive path. So I felt like okay to invade her wonderful life a little bit more. I think we both needed to talk through some things, with our childhood, and, the things that we, weren't going to be able to discuss later in life because she wasn't going to be around. So we had a lot of really deep and meaningful conversations. So it brought us close. One of the bad things, or one of the good things rather, there aren't too many good things, but one of the good things about somebody that might go through a prolonged experience with some kind of health issue, especially with cancer or something that could be, deadly in the end, is that it does give you an opportunity, can give you an opportunity to, have meaningful interaction with those that you care about. We're not always equipped to have those meaningful interactions, but it can provide that. And for my sister and I, it did. So as my life was kind of getting on track, and her life was, the reflection of it was going to be, pretty short, it just gave us a chance to bond, pretty well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And yeah, sometimes those moments of, what seemed tragic, it forces you, it's the catalyst to really heal and to get things into place. So that's wonderful you had that experience, David. So how long was it from the diagnosis to the passing of your sister?
So she got diagnosed, let's see, right about that same time that my kids were like 4, just before they were 5. And so she lasted just about 4 years. And so it was a pretty long, arduous time for her. She had such a rare type of brain cancer that she became a board study for a comprehensive cancer center in Southern California, which probably prolonged her life and enhanced her care. So I was super grateful to them, and had done a bunch of fundraisers in her memory for them, because they really did a really special thing for her. Her journey was about 4 years. Over that time, right, I went down a path of becoming very, physically fit, a lot happier, more centered, more grounded, wonderful, life with my kids. The three of us were great. And, obviously hers was deteriorating, but we I'll tell you a story, David. We kind of made this pact near the end of her life. She wanted to show up physically for this event that was taking place in her in her honor. Team of people that were going to do this 24-hour event, and she wanted to be out there to go watch all of them cheer her on and support her because she thought it was such a meaningful gesture on everybody's part. At that time, I was kind of at the level where I said to her, hey, I can run for the whole 24 hours. If you're going to be out there watching everybody for the whole 24 hours, I'll run for the whole 24 hours and show my support to you. And unfortunately, she died a couple of days before the event, but it really provided a catalyst for, I think part of the reason that you and I came together was the Cycle of Lives project. And it really provided a catalyst for this new chapter in my life where I really wanted to explore the concept of why people were not really well equipped to deal with the emotional side of trauma. And when I was on that 24-hour run around a track, surrounded by hundreds of people who were going through the trauma of cancer, or a loved one, or they were a caregiver of somebody that was going through it, it was just something that just poured into every ounce of my awareness that people just were not equipped to talk about the emotional side of what they were going through. And that really sparked in me a desire to figure out why and to see if I could provide some insight to help others navigate that really hard facet of trauma, which is the emotional side of it.
So before we move forward and you describe that in detail and how people can get involved, what were you doing professionally at this time? Were you still working on Wall Street as a financial advisor, or were you doing something else at this point?
So I had gone from advisor to manager to bigger manager to bigger manager. I basically was managing a bunch of offices in the Southern California area for a major Wall Street firm that was filled with a bunch of financial advisors. So I was the guy that managed the people that managed people's money. So I was running a big business. I had, a couple hundred employees, and, it was a big job and a big responsibility, but that's what I was doing at that time. So I was balancing, I kind of had 3 points that I was balancing, right? Like we all do, right? I had this ridiculous amount of responsibility at work, which was great because I was in a position where I could get to do that, right? I was being a dad and loving that because it was a more purposeful, meaningful, kind of intentional parenting, because we were in a really good, safe, happy place. And then I was embarking on this athletic, endurance athletic kind of goal seeking kind of part of me. So it was very healthy, very wonderful time period in my life. So that's what was going on at that time. And, that against the backdrop of seeing what was going on with my sister just gave me a little more compassion to understand that the emotional side of what we're going through, which we often don't take the time or can't take the time to comprehend. Look, when you're dealing with things like trauma, battling a disease or whatever, you're just dealing with the issues, right? How do I get care? How do I get this problem taken care of? How do I get my kids to, be watched while I'm going to the chemo? How do I get from appointment to appointment? How do I deal with my employer and time off of work? And you're just dealing with the issues, right? The emotional side of it, we don't often deal with. And so because I was in a much better place and I could see that, I could see that in other people. And I really wanted to explore that concept. And so that's, that was kind of the genesis of it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people go through trauma and they're so focused on getting through it, they don't really think about the after effects. And not just for them, but for the family members, for the children. There's some, grooves it makes in our brain, so to speak, in our memories. And that if we don't pick up and move to a clear channel, we'll get stuck in that loop or with that feeling or have some kind of fear, latent fear. So cycles of life, I want you to talk about that and explain what it is and, why you started it and how people can get involved. But before we do, from that roughly 45 your mark of your life back? Is there anything we miss? Is there any lesson you want to cover? Is there any truth you want to share before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I could share a lot. I mean, at that time, I learned so much through endurance athletics that I found paralleled what I had learned in life and business. And again, I think that there's a group of people that are fortunate enough to have some guidance and some understanding and some awareness of what's ahead of them, either because they've had mentorship or they've had guidance or they had a coach or they had a good education and they kind of figure stuff out. I'm more coming from the school of hard knocks on all of it, on life, on business, and on athletics. I found a lot of parallels, and I wrote this book that talked about kind of that idea coupled with the idea of like doing things for yourself rather than looking for other people's approval. And in there, I talk about a lot of lessons that I learned because I thought people like me could help learn from them, and some of those, I think probably the most impactful is one we already talked about, David, which is setting your goals much higher than you think you should. Another one that I kind of used to walk around, maybe not vocalizing it and maybe not from a defeatist standpoint, but I did kind of walk around wondering why things were always so hard. And, I think that drove me for a while, and maybe for a long, long while, as to why everything has to be so hard. And then I realized that if you're trying to do really difficult things, if you're trying to do real meaningful things, if you're trying to make an impact in your own life or in other people's lives, if you're running a big business, if you're doing big charitable work, whatever, it's supposed to be hard. Like I didn't know that, right? I didn't accept that it was supposed to be hard. And once you accept like something's supposed to be hard, it's not really as hard as the way you do if you walk around going, oh, why is it so hard? And so I kind of changed my mind frame, and it certainly helped me with my kids too, and helped me with employees and running businesses, is that things are sometimes, if you're trying to do difficult things, they're going to be hard. Just accept that fact. And I love that because it really helped frame my mindset around putting more of my energy toward the task than more of my energy trying to wrap my brain around why the task is so difficult. So I learned a lot of lessons like that, and I wrote about it in a book called Winning in the Middle of the Pack. And so that was those, I could go on and on about some of those lessons, but really I think the biggest couple were things we've already talked about.
Okay. So now you see the need and the trauma that you faced and your family faced, and you get this idea for Cycles of Life. Describe what Cycles of Life is and what you're doing.
Okay, so I'll try not to give too long of an answer, but like I was starting to talk about, David, is that when I was doing these events and I was really being aware of what people were going through and really trying to observe the issues, I really noticed that people struggled when it came to the emotional side of what they were going through. And geez, every single person that I talked to, or every person that I kind of was aware of was going through something difficult, it was the emotional side of things that they couldn't talk about. And I realized that there's got to be some way to shed some light on that, try to figure it out, and maybe even perhaps even try to help, right? I don't know that I have the answers, but maybe I could help put together a bunch of people that had the answers. And I thought to myself, let me tell you a quick story. What made me think about this is I was running, like I said, this big business for a major Wall Street firm. And during the financial crisis, one of my financial advisors, young family, very successful, buckled under the weight of the stress and jumped off the building. Okay. Anybody, if you're ever having any negative thoughts, you got to talk to somebody. There are tons of people that are willing to help, right? Tons. Okay. But he didn't have anybody he could talk to, his wife, his kids, his coworkers, whatever. And David, before I could get a trauma counselor in there, I walked around I had about 50 or 60 employees in that one building. And I walked around to each person's office and I closed the door and I said, oh my gosh, can you imagine that? And every single one of them, David, every single one, these were people I had known for years, right? I'd gone to weddings, I'd gone to funerals, I'd celebrated birthdays, I had them over at barbecues, I'd helped them with businesses. I'd sat down with them and their best clients, right? I knew these people. Every single one of them, David, gave me a story where they had a first person experience with suicide. A parent, a friend, somebody they grew up with, an aunt, a friend of their child. It's like unbelievable. I just couldn't imagine it. Why? Because we don't like to talk about that stuff, right? It's so unbelievably difficult, but we're so affected by those traumas. And so when it came to noticing that same thing with people that were going through cancer, not just the people going through it, but their loved ones, caregivers, and et cetera, I said, man, why is that? What is it? And so I just said, I got to get a bunch of people that have very interesting stories. I got to get to the root of their issues. I got to find out what traumas they went through in life. I got to figure out how they did or didn't deal with the trauma, with the emotional side of the experiences they had gone through, how they were able to or not able to do that, who they could rely on, who they couldn't rely on. I just really wanted to get to the heart of their stories so that I could write them so that we could see if we could learn anything from those stories. And so that was the kind of overriding goal, was to say, can I find enough interesting people that were varied in perspective, different types of cancer, different ages, different perspectives, different emotions, that had vastly different traumas in their lives, and kind of get to the root of how they were able to or unable to navigate the emotional side of it. And so that was the idea.
Now, if you were to summarize for our listeners, the book that you have out there, they can get, I'm going to put a link to the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're dealing with trauma, what are some, 3 or 4 bullet points? Say, hey, here's great steps to start taking.
Well, sure. So look, here's what I did, right? I got 15, what ended up making the book was 15 people. Again, doctors, caregivers, loved ones, survivors, patients, family members, you name it. All of different ages, all different types of traumas that they experience, the suicide of a parent, drug abuse, addiction, making bad decisions, being dealt bad hands in life, self-isolation, you name it, all these different things, very evocative, very inspiring, very moving stories. And I put them together, written first person from their perspective, so that we could try to learn tools that would better allow us to communicate with the people that are important to us. Because, that old saying, David, you never know what people are going through or what they have gone through. We really don't know what they have gone through or what they're going through. And so,
yeah, that's 100%. If you're listening and you think, oh, that person's life's so amazing, I wish I was like them. No, you have no idea. If they seem, there was a guy, I don't want to go into details, but he was like wealthy, like millionaire wealthy, had a model. I don't know, I think she was his wife, 20 years younger, had everything you could ever imagine in the world's eyes. And the dude ended up chopping himself up with like a saw in a sleeping bag during Christmas because he was so depressed. So you never know what somebody's going through.
You just don't. And you also don't know what they have gone through. Right. And so what I think is important is, it's pretty interesting, because I got people that have been through, again, this wide range of crazy experiences, but to a T, every single one of them hadn't really talked to anybody about it. Now, I'm not saying that they all didn't have somebody in their lives that they hadn't talked to, but not all of them said, yeah, it's okay to ask me whatever, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about are things I've never talked about with somebody else. So when I got to a free pass to ask people everything that went through their brains, what they went through, and I did it in an environment that made them safe to talk to me, that made it safe for them to interact with me in a way that I wasn't going to judge them. I wasn't a professional who was looking to value what they did or didn't do. I just wanted to help tell their story so that we could learn from it. The stuff that they laid out David, was unbelievable. It was just absolutely amazing. And sometimes it came out of a positive experience, and sometimes it came out of a negative experience, but it was really, really cool. And I think what the reader can do when they read these stories, as I know from the people that have given me feedback, David, and there's been hundreds and hundreds of people that have told me their thoughts on the book, is that they come back to that thing like, oh my God, I had no idea somebody might have been going through that. I had no idea that this is what people had dealt with. I had no idea this was the limiter that prevented them from asking for help, or that made them push me away when they wanted to pull me forward, and those type of things. So I think reading these stories, we can all identify with what people have gone through, because now we know, we're seeing it, we're reading it, we're feeling it. And then that gives us some insight into how to kind of bring that into our own lives so that we can be better equipped to talk to the people that matter to us. And that's, I mean, I could tell you a ton of stories from the book that would be indicative of that. I mean, if you want to go there, we can go there. But I think the most important thing to realize is that when you are given a time to really take a really deep dive into what people have gone through, then you really have some compassion and empathy and understanding for what allows them or has not allowed them to navigate the emotional side, so that you can now take some of that knowledge and apply that to your own experiences and form more authentic, deeper connections with the people that that are going through things. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And I know in my own life, what I've observed in my own life, what I've seen in other people's lives, is if you're listening to this and you're discouraged and you're listening to David, grab the book, reach out for help. If you need something, let us see if we can help you, because oh man, there's so many people I know that not only had something tragic happen to them or terrible, but they had repeated things for years. But that permanent solution of suicide for temporary problems, they didn't cave to. And they ended up being in a better place because they survived this trauma. They are thriving now. They have amazing lives. And they're like looking back like, wow, I almost gave up. Like, how many guests just on the show, if you listen to our show regularly, considered suicide, but they listened to God instead of Satan, and they continued and pressed on, just doing the right thing day after day. And now they have remarkable lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Dave, thank you so much for talking about this, because it's a real topic, especially with all this. I don't want to get into I don't mind talking about politics, but I don't want to bore people around the world. But all this COVID pandemic, all this government failure, all this crazy control and propaganda that mainstream media is pushing out all around the world, not just America, they're striking fear into the heart of people. They're having children having anxiety and panic attacks. And they're hearing stories of this tragedy after tragedy. And so many people are seeing life as hopeless, and they're thinking about suicide. So this is a super, super timely podcast. Talk to us about Cycles of Life. What are you doing with the ministry specifically? How can people get active in it? How can people get involved to help it? How can people be helped by it?
Okay. So, and thank you for that, David. And it's not just something as drastic as suicide. How about, and again, if anybody has any negative thoughts, there's plenty of people and professionals that want to talk to you and talk you through these issues. But I'm just talking about things like isolation, or not feeling safe to ask for help, or feeling that asking for help is a negative thing. It's a positive thing because it's allowing other people that care about you to express that care. So there's a lot of things that we don't do because we don't want to put our foot in our mouth. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to burden people. We don't want to feel guilty. There's a million things that prevent us from forming these kind of authentic, deep connections with people. And I think that if you're on one side of it, you have to find somebody, and they're probably a lot closer than you think, that can provide you a safe space to deal with these issues. And if you're on the other side of it, then there's people that are not far away from you that need that help and want, and you got to provide that safe space for them, to help them go through whatever they're going through. What I did with the book was all 15 people, they each had a charity, most of them a cancer focused charity. Moffitt Cancer Center, not that far away from where you're at, Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida, NYU, Children's Hospital LA, American Cancer Society. They're all listed in the book and on my website, but each one of the 15 had a organization that they felt compelled that they wanted to support. So I decided that 100% of the net proceeds from the book are going to support those organizations. So my primary goal with this book is to provide evocative, interesting, moving stories that we can take some of the lessons learned from other people's lives and apply them to our own toolbox and how to interact with others. That's the number one goal. The number two goal is, by the way, all the proceeds go to help organizations that are helping people deal with really difficult things. So, that's it. We haven't talked about, one of the fun things about the book is that my mission in life is kind of to help people form deeper connections through storytelling. And I feel like we're connected by emotions, we're connected by stories. So in order to connect the stories, I rode my bike 4,700 miles in 45 days to meet the people I've been talking to on the phone for a couple of years for the first time, meet most of them for the first time. And so I in between the 15 stories, I have a short little narrative of the people I met along the way, and just some inspiring stories and a little bit about the bike ride and how difficult it was and all of that. So I'm hoping that the book, is not only inspirational for people, but also is insightful and also entertaining too.
Absolutely. And again, we'll put the notes in the show notes, a link, but where can they pick up the book so they can get inspired and read these stories?
Sure. Well, the book is available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookstore. Heck, I know you got listeners around the world. I had a guy tell me, "Hey, I went to 3 bookstores in my hometown in Ireland, and none of them had your book." I sent him an ebook, but you're going to have the audio book is on Amazon, and it's wherever books are sold. It's called Cycle of Lives, and it really is interesting. Like David, I'm inspired by one person's story, but I'm really not moved into action by it. I can get moved into action by 15 people's stories. Like when I hear a bunch of stories and they kind of get some common themes, it means a lot more to me than hearing one person's inspirational story. So I think that if you're moved like me by real connection to characters, real connection to real life people and their experiences, this has a wide range of ability for you to connect with just a ton of different people at a really, really deep level. And I think it could move you.
Awesome, my friend. Well, David, I've appreciated you being here today. From your birth to where you are today, is there anything that we've missed before we get into where you're going and how we can help you get there?
No, thanks. I mean, look, one of the great things about what you do and podcasting in general is it gives people an opportunity to connect. And when you bring stories, I'm just really touched by the fact that you bring these remarkable people on and these remarkable stories, because what we don't often do is give ourselves a chance to really learn about other people and their experiences. And not so much that we're like in awe of what they've done, but just so we can maybe tweak our compass just a tiny bit, right, to do things differently. So I am constantly driven by the idea that people are interesting and you just don't know what they've been through, and I'm dying to find out more. So I would just say that the only thing I've missed is talking about how inspirational it was to me to find out more reality behind that statement of you never know what people have gone through, because when you do find out, it's super, super moving. So I'd say the one thing I'd say is if you're into stuff like what David's doing, you got to continue it because people are pretty remarkable, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everybody has a story. And some people think, well, I don't have a story. My life's boring. Everybody's got a story. And everybody, if you're breathing, has a future. We're not done yet. And like David was talking about, whether you're listening, whether you're watching, whether you're reading, no matter what you do, you need to do. Like our slogan for the podcast, I don't know if you know this, David, it's listen, do, repeat for life. So listening or absorbing great content is good, but you need to do it. You need to apply it. And then you need to repeat it consistently like Dave did with his life. And then you're going to have a great life in this world and an eternity to come. So Dave, I really thank you for being here, man. It's been a pleasure and honor. I hope we continue the conversation, the friendship. And any final parting words or thoughts to our audience before we sign off for the day?
No, I would just say on adding on what you said, which is so beautifully said, is that the way that we can kind of get in touch with ourselves and with those that are close to us in a deeper level is to just ask these open-ended questions and find out more. Because what's super amazing, what you said was, I was smiling in the background because every single person I spoke to, and I spoke to remarkable people that had these ridiculously inspirational, moving, evocative, just insane stories. Every single one of them, David, in the beginning of my conversation with them, had something to say like, yeah, we can talk, but my story's not that interesting. And their stories were ridiculously interesting, right? And so to find out more, just give people a safe space, ask open-ended questions, and be a little present. It's such a rewarding experience, and I'm really proud of you for what you're doing, and thank you for giving me a forum to talk to people about what I'm doing. And I know your listeners are embarrassed by the fact that their life is interesting because they're just living their lives, but talk to people and you're going to get a lot out of learning from them, and they're going to get a lot out of learning from you.
Well said. I agree 100%. Thank you very much, David. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm David Pasqualone. This is David Richman. If you need either one of us, please reach out through the email, go to our podcast show notes, whether it's on YouTube, the website, your podcast player, click on send Dave a message, visit his website, get the help you need. We'll give you as much as we can. We can't do everything, and there's only one of us, but there's one of you, and there's 7 billion other people in the world. We'll try to connect you so you can get the help you need wherever you are. But thank you, David, again. You truly are a remarkable man. And to our listeners, we love you. Thanks for being here. Replay this episode if you haven't taken any good notes, or even just get that repetition. Listen to it again. Take all the good you can, and then apply it. And then we'll see you next week for the next remarkable episode of the Remarkable People Podcast. Thanks again, Dave.
You're super welcome. Thank you, David.
All right. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat for life.